The war party found her at Torchfall, frozen in the ash-gray courtyard of the border, keep with something small and dying pressed against her heart. Brittany Vale did not move when a ring of warriors flooded through the shattered gates around her. She did not raise her hands. She did not run. Her silver-white hair fell loose across her shoulders like pale moonlight against rough stone, and her eyes, those quiet Omega eyes, soft as still water and twice as deep, never lifted from the dark bundle of fur tucked against her chest. A single tear caught the torchlight as it tracked down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. Put the cub down, Omega. He stood at the mouth of the gate. Wayne Ashbourne, Alpha King of the Ironhold Packs. A wall of a man wrapped in battle-dark fur and iron plate, his ashwood spear leveled directly at her heart. His eyes had gone forged steel silver. His wolf was already at the surface. Every torch in the courtyard guttered sideways. He believed she had killed his cub. She was the only reason it was still breathing. Chapter 1. The first warrior to reach her grabbed her by the collar. He was the beta commander, broad, scarred, with the kind of hands that had broken things professionally for 20 years. He wrenched Brittany sideways, and the cub lurched in her grip. She caught it, both arms tightening on instinct, a sound leaving her throat that was barely human, low and fierce and maternal in a way that made three warriors take an involuntary step back. Blood on her hands, my king. The beta commander yanked her wrist upward for the courtyard to see. Omega markings. Notebook sent. She's a stray. He said the last word the way men say vermin. Give us one reason we shouldn't put her in the ground beside whatever she did to that cub. Brittany didn't answer him. She looked at Wayne. Show them, she said quietly. Not a plea, a statement. Then she shifted the cub to one arm. Carefully, the way someone handles something they have already decided they will die before dropping, and pulled back her sleeves with her teeth. The courtyard went still. Both forearms, wrist to elbow, were destroyed. Deep parallel gouges, the kind left by hooked talons rather than claws, had torn through skin and dried dark in the cold air. 3 separate sets, ragged at the edges. The kind of wounds that didn't come from one attack. They came from an attack that kept coming back, kept circling, kept diving, while she stood her ground and refused to move. Hollow crow marks. Every wolf in that courtyard knew what hollow crow marks looked like. The beta commander's grip on her wrist loosened slightly. He didn't release her, but it loosened. She fought them off, one of the younger warriors said, almost to himself. Alone. Nobody confirmed it. Nobody needed to. In Brittany's arms, the cub stirred. It was the smallest thing, a twitch of one dark paw, a shallow exhale that fogged faintly in the cold. But every head in the courtyard turned toward it like a compass finding north. The beta commander stepped back without being told. Someone made a sound that was not quite a word. Brittany looked down at the pup, and her entire face changed. The fierceness didn't leave. It never fully left, but something underneath it surfaced, raw and unguarded and bottomless. She pressed her lips once more to the cub's small dark forehead, very gently, the way you do when you are not sure how many chances you have left. Wayne Ashbourne had not moved. He stood exactly where he'd been since the gate, spear still in hand, warriors between him and the girl, the torchlight carving his face into hard angles of shadow and amber. His eyes tracked the torn forearms, the cub's faint breath, the tear drying on her cheek. His jaw was locked so tight the muscle feathered at the corner. He said nothing. He did not lower the spear, but he had not thrown it either. Chapter 2. It happened without warning. The cub's paw, which had stirred only minutes before, went still. The small chest that had been rising in shallow, fragile intervals simply paused. Brittany felt it before anyone saw it. Her arms tightened. Her breath caught. She looked down at the dark little face tucked against her chest, and something in her expression shifted in a way that had no name. Not panic, not grief exactly, but the specific devastation of someone watching a door close that they had fought with everything they had to keep open. The beta commander took a step forward. She turned away from him. Not defiant, not dramatic. She simply turned, curling her body around the cub the way a tree curves around a wound, and she closed her eyes. Then she began to sing. It started below, speaking, below breath, almost, a sound that seemed to come from somewhere older than her body, low and continuous and searching, the way water finds cracks in stone without being told to. The language was not the common tongue. It was not any dialect the warriors present could name. It was the old Omega tongue, the one spoken before pacts had kings or borders or laws, the one that existed only in burial rites and the oldest corners of pack memory. A lament and release. A way of saying you were here, and I saw you, and I will not let you go unnamed into the dark. The nearest torch dimmed, not gutter dimmed, as though the flame itself had the decency to quiet down. Then the next one, then the one above the gate. The beta commander stopped walking. He stood with one boot raised and did not put it down. Beside him a warrior, a man with 30 years of blood on his hands who had not bowed to anything living, dropped his chin slowly to his chest. Then the man beside him, then the next, one by one, without a word passing between them. Without an order given, the entire war party bowed their heads in the dimming courtyard like wolves at a burial ground. Because that is what this was. Wayne Ashbourne felt it move through him like a spear through still water. Not pain, not weakness, something far more dangerous than either. Something he had locked in a room inside himself 3 winters ago and bolted shut and never returned to. It moved through the bolt, through the door, through every wall he had constructed in the years since he stopped letting himself feel the cost of ruling. His spear arm dropped, not lowered, dropped. The butt of it struck the stone courtyard, and the sound rang out sharp and final as a bell, and every warrior who heard it looked up, because in 20 years, no one had ever seen Wayne Ashbourne's weapon hand fall without his permission. He was staring at her, the silver-haired girl who sang to the dying in the old tongue, in the dark, for an audience of none, and somehow unmade him completely. Chapter 3. The song ended the way it began, without announcement, dissolving back into silence like smoke into cold air. Brittany stood motionless in the dimmed courtyard, eyes still closed, the cub pressed against her chest. She was breathing hard, not from exertion, but from the particular exhaustion of someone who has poured something irreplaceable out of themselves and is only now feeling the empty space it left behind. No one spoke. Then Wayne moved. He crossed the courtyard in long, deliberate strides. Not the march of a king asserting authority, not the advance of a warrior closing distance on a threat. Something else entirely. Something his beta commander had never seen in 20 years of service and would spend the rest of his life struggling to describe accurately. The Alpha King walked toward the silver-haired Omega the way you approach something sacred. Carefully, with attention, he stopped directly in front of her. Brittany opened her eyes. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, the packless girl with ruined forearms and tear tracks drying on her cheeks, and the king with a spear he had forgotten he was still holding. The torches had not fully recovered. The courtyard remained half-lit and hushed around them, every warrior frozen in place, no one breathing loud enough to matter. Wayne reached out and took the cub. Gently, the word moved through the watching warriors like a current. Gently, his enormous hands that had driven spears and broken treaties and carried the weight of 3 kingdoms, cupped the small dark body with a carefulness so complete and unguarded that the beta commander looked away as though he had witnessed something private. The cub did not stir, but it was warm, and it was breathing, thin and threadbare, but breathing, and Wayne held it against his chest with the focused stillness of a man who has decided that this small animal will not die on his watch. He turned toward the stronghold without a word. Brittany followed him. She did not ask permission. She did not look to the beta commander or the warriors flanking the gate. She simply fell in a step behind the Alpha King as though the space directly behind him had always been hers, her chin level, her torn arms hanging at her sides. 3 warriors moved to intercept her. Wayne did not turn around. He said nothing, but something in his shoulders shifted, a fractional squaring, a subtle broadcast of intent that every wolf in that courtyard read without difficulty. They stepped aside. The pack healers worked by firelight through the long hours of the night, their hands efficient and quiet over the cub's small body. Brittany sat on the stone floor beside the pallet and did not move from it. Not when they brought food she didn't touch. Not when the candles burned to stubs and were replaced. Not when the cold deepened and her breath began to fog in the interior air. She stayed, because she had carried him 4 hours through the dark to reach these walls, and she was not about to stop now. Chapter 4. Dawn came in through the arrow slits slowly, the way it does in winter, reluctant, gray at the edges, as though the sun itself wasn't certain it was welcome. Wayne had not slept. He stood in the doorway of the healing room with one shoulder against the stone frame, arms crossed, and watched the light change on the far wall. The healers had gone an hour before, satisfied and quiet, exchanging the kind of looks professionals exchange when an outcome surprises them. One of them had paused at the door and glanced back at the girl on the floor, then at Wayne. Then she left without saying what she was thinking, which was probably wise. The cub was breathing steadily, not the thin, borrowed breathing of the night before. Real breathing, deep and rhythmic, the small chest rising and falling with something that felt permanent. It lay on the pallet, wrapped in clean linen, one dark paw curled loosely at its shin, and it looked so profoundly, defiantly alive that Wayne had to look away from it for a moment and study the ceiling. Then he looked at Brittany. She had not made it to a chair. Sometime in the deepest part of the night, she had simply run out of the ability to remain upright and had slid sideways against the stone wall beside the pallet, one hand still resting near the cub's flank, close enough to feel it breathing. Her silver hair had fanned out across the cold floor beneath her, pale and still in the early light, spreading like frost across dark stone. Her torn forearms were folded against her chest. Her face, in sleep, had finally let go of everything it had been carrying. She looked young. She looked exhausted down to her bones. She looked like someone who had given every last thing they had, and then given a little more on top of it. Something moved behind Wayne's eyes. He had not felt it in 3 winters. That specific internal shifting, like a frozen thing remembering it was once water. It was not a dramatic sensation. It did not announce itself. It simply arrived quietly in his chest and stood there, and he found he lacked either the energy or the inclination to throw it out. He pushed off the door frame. He crossed to where she slept, unclasped the fur cloak from his own shoulders, dark wolf gray, heavy, still warm from his body, and crouched down beside her. For a moment he stayed there, close enough to see the dried tear tracks on her cheek, the small furrow still present between her brows, even in sleep, as though some part of her was still out there in the dark fighting off things with hooked talons. He laid the cloak over her carefully. Both hands. No corners missed. He stayed crouched for 1 moment longer than was necessary. Then he stood, looked once more at the steadily breathing cub, and walked back to the doorway to face whatever the morning required of him. Chapter 5. The council chamber was built to intimidate, and it was good at its job. High ceilings of dark-veined stone, a table long enough to seat 12 elders, and walls lined with the mounted relics of every significant war the Ironhold packs had ever won. Brittany stood at the center of it in her torn clothes with Wayne's fur cloak still around her shoulders. She had not given it back, and no one had asked for it, and looked at the 12 men and women staring at her like a problem that needed solving before lunch. The beta commander presented the case efficiently. Packless, unclaimed, no territor, no allegiance, no PEC markings, found inside Ironhold border walls without invitation or authorization, in physical contact with the royal ward. He laid out the way you lay out kindling, clean and dry and ready to catch. Pack law, Elder Vorith informed the room, was unambiguous. Unauthorized presence within the stronghold walls. Unauthorized handling of a ward of the Alpha's blood. The penalty in both cases was exile beyond the northern border. He said it without malice, which somehow made it worse. He was not cruel. He simply operated the way old laws operate, without memory of the reasons they were written. One by one, the council voted. Exile, exile, exile. 11 voices, measured and certain, each one landing in the chamber like a stone dropped into still water. Brittany stood with her chin level and her hands loose at her sides and did not flinch from a single one. Wayne had not spoken yet. He sat at the head of the table in the high-back chair that had held every Alpha King before him, one hand resting on the arm of it, his expression doing the thing it did, revealing nothing, giving no preview, offering no warmth or warning. The council turned to him as a formality. The vote was 11-0. In 20 years of his reign, there had never been an overrule. There was no reason to expect one now. No, the word was quiet. That was the most unsettling part. Not a declaration, not a challenge. Simply a door closing on the matter, firm and final, in a tone that made Elder Vortha's prepared follow-up remarks dissolve unspoken. 11 faces turned toward their king with varying degrees of controlled alarm. "She is a ward of the Alpha's house," Wayne said, "under my protection, formally and permanently." He let that sit for exactly one breath. "If the council has further objections, I'll hear them now." No one had further objections. The silence that followed was the particular kind that fills a room when 12 experienced people simultaneously revise their understanding of the world they are living in. Elder Vorth set his papers down very carefully, as though sudden movements might be inadvisable. Brittany looked at Wayne across the long table. He was already looking at something else, but the cloak was still on her shoulders. Chapter 6. She settled into the stronghold the way water settles into a landscape, quietly, without asking permission, finding every low place that needed filling. It started small. A young wolf with a splinted leg who couldn't sleep, whose whimpering carried down the corridor at odd hours until the night Brittany appeared in the doorway of the healing ward with no explanation and sat beside him and hummed something low and wordless until he went under. The healers noted it without commenting. The next evening she was back. Then the evening after that. Within a week, she had simply become part of the ward's routine, the way certain presences become load-bearing without anyone deciding they should be. Then the cubs found her. It was unclear who discovered whom first, but within days of Brittany earning the run of the stronghold's inner corridors, the younger wolves had identified her the way young things identify safe harbors, through instinct, without language, completely without shame. She could be found at dusk in the east corridor with 2 or 3 cubs pressed against her sides while she sang in the old tongue, her silver hair loose, her voice carrying just far enough to matter. She never summoned them. They simply appeared, then stayed. She learned the stronghold's rhythms. She learned which wolves carried old wounds that had never been properly tended, not physical ones. She learned which warriors went quiet at certain hours and which elders ate alone. She did not fix these things dramatically. She simply made herself available in their vicinity, steady and unhurried and genuinely interested, until the people around her remembered what it felt like to be seen by someone who wanted nothing from them. Wayne watched all of it, from doorways mostly, sometimes from the upper parapets where the sight lines were good and the pretense of attending to other business was easier to maintain. He watched her crouch down to a frightened cub's level in the courtyard and speak to it quietly until its ears came forward. He watched her talk with Elder Vorth, who had voted to exile her 14 days ago, with such complete lack of resentment that the old man had looked quietly undone by the end of the conversation. He was watching from the gate parapet on the 5th evening when his beta commander appeared at his left shoulder and stood there for a moment in companionable silence. "You're staring again, my king." Wayne said nothing. Below, in the east corridor, Brittany had begun the dusk song. Even from this height and distance it arrived clearly, low and ancient, threaded through the cold air like something the stronghold itself was exhaling. One of the cubs tucked against her side let out a sleepy sound. She didn't pause. "My king," the beta said again, less certainly this time. I know, Wayne said. He didn't move from the parapet. He watched until the corridor torches were lit and the song finally softened into silence. And only then did he turn and walk away. Chapter 7. He heard her before he saw her. The training yard sat at the stronghold's western edge, open to the night sky, torches burning at the four corners on a timer no one had ever adjusted. Wayne was crossing the upper walkway above it, unable to sleep, taking the long route back from nowhere in particular, which had become a habit he refused to examine, when a sound reached him. Not the clean ring of steel on steel. Something more irregular than that. The repeated impact of a blade connecting with the practice post at wrong angles, too hard, with the particular ferocity of someone who does not know what they're doing but has decided that ignorance is not a reason to stop. He looked down into the yard. Brittany had her back to him, stance too wide, both hands white-knuckled around the grip of a borrowed short blade that was slightly too long for her frame. She swung at the post. The angle was poor, and the impact jarred up her arms, and she made a low, frustrated sound and reset and swung again. Her silver hair was pulled back. She was wearing no cloak. The cold didn't appear to be a factor she had chosen to consider. Wayne watched for a moment longer than he should have, before he moved. He came down the yard steps without hurrying, and she spun toward him with the sound. Blade up, weight back, wrong foot forward, and he looked at her stance and said simply, "You'd be dead." She lowered the blade approximately 2 inches. "Not all the way." "I'm aware," she said. "That's why I'm here." He crossed the yard, stopped in front of her, and held out his hand. She looked at it, then at him. Then she placed the blade in his palm. He turned at once, handed it back handle first, and moved behind her. His hands came to her forearms, not gripping, just redirecting, the way you correct the angle of something without forcing it. And he adjusted her grip on the handle, then stepped her left foot back with the side of his boot, then squared her leading shoulder forward with 2 fingers. "Again," he said. She swung. The blade landed clean and flat, and the impact didn't jar. She made a small involuntary sound of surprise. Again, they worked through it in silence. Him correcting, her repeating, the torches burning steady at the yard's 4 corners. His hands returned to her forearms again and again, brief and precise, and neither of them remarked on it. The space between instruction and something else narrowed incrementally with each pass, and neither of them remarked on that either. At some point the correction stopped, and she was simply moving through the forms while he watched from a step behind her, close enough that his breath fogged past her shoulder in the cold air. The yard was very quiet. Neither of them moved to leave. Chapter 8. The moon gathering happened once a year, and the whole stronghold felt it coming for days beforehand. A low collective restlessness, wolves moving differently through corridors, conversations trailing off mid-sentence as though something larger was already occupying the available attention. Brittany had been told what to expect. She had not been told what it would feel like. The gathering circle was laid out in the great courtyard under an open sky. The same courtyard where she had knelt in ash and torchlight 2 months ago with a dying cub pressed against her heart. It looked different now, ringed with old stone lanterns, the pack arranged in concentric circles by rank and bloodline, the elder wolves at the center in ceremonial gray. The night was clear and brutally cold, and the moon was the kind of full that makes the world look like it's been redrawn in silver ink. Wayne stood at the outer edge of the inner circle in his formal iron plate, expression composed, giving nothing away. He had not looked at her when she took her place in the outer ring. She had noticed that he hadn't. The reading ritual moved through the pack methodically, the eldest of the elder wolves, a woman named Sora, small and white-haired, and carrying about her the particular gravity of someone who has outlived most of their surprises, pressing 2 fingers briefly to each wolf's sternum and murmuring the old words. Most passed without incident. Occasionally she paused longer at someone, and the watching pack leaned in collectively, and then she moved on. She reached Brittany. She pressed 2 fingers to her sternum and went completely still. The murmuring stopped. Sora's eyes opened fully, and she looked across the circle directly at Wayne with an expression that was not quite shock, but was the thing that lives immediately next to it. Her hand did not move from Brittany's chest. The silence that had been quiet a moment ago became a different kind of silence entirely, charged and enormous, and held by every wolf in the circle simultaneously. Then the scent rose. Brittany didn't have a name for it. It arrived like the first note of a song you have never heard, but somehow already know, warm and specific and devastating in its familiarity, as though some part of her had been waiting for it long enough to have given up waiting. She heard someone in the circle exhale sharply. She heard the beta commander say nothing, which was somehow louder than words. She looked up. Wayne was already moving. He crossed the circle without haste and without hesitation, the pack parting around him automatically, Sora stepping aside with her eyes still wide. He stopped directly in front of Brittany and looked at her for one long moment. All the things he did not say collected in his expression, visible and unguarded for the first time since the courtyard. Then he turned his hand over and opened his palm. She looked at it. She looked at him. She placed her hand in his. Chapter 9. 6 months is not a long time to change a kingdom. And yet, the stronghold ran differently now in ways that were difficult to itemize and impossible to miss. The healing ward had doubled its capacity and halved its waiting list. The younger wolves moved through the corridors with a looseness that hadn't been there before, the particular ease of creatures who have stopped bracing for something. Meals in the Great Hall ran longer, not because anyone ordered it, but because people had begun to want to stay at the table. Elder Voreth had started leaving his door open in the afternoons. The beta commander had been observed on 2 separate occasions, laughing. Small things. The kind that don't appear in any official record of a reign, but constitute, in the end, most of what a reign actually is. The cub had a name now. The pack had given it to him at the winter ceremony. Ash for the courtyard where he had nearly died and hadn't. He was sturdy and ridiculous and relentlessly underfoot, and his favorite place in the entire stronghold was the floor beside Brittany's chair at the end of the day, pressed against her feet with the boneless contentment of an animal who has never once doubted that he is exactly where he belongs. He was there now, in the great hall, deeply asleep and twitching with whatever cubs dream about, while the morning moved around him and paid him the respect of not waking him. Brittany stood at the fortress gates in the thin winter light with her silver hair loose and Wayne's cloak, a new one, made for her, which she wore without comment, settled across her shoulders. The delegation from the eastern reaches had been sighted an hour out. 4 pack representatives, 2 treaty witnesses, 1 recorder. A formal visit, the kind that went into the official record. Wayne stood beside her, not in front, not slightly ahead in the way of a king who has remembered at the last moment to acknowledge someone behind him. Beside her, shoulder to shoulder, his presence arranged around hers the way it had quietly rearranged itself over 6 months without either of them making a formal announcement about it. The delegation rode through the gate and drew up in the courtyard, taking in the Alpha King with the practiced efficiency of people who negotiate for a living. Their lead representative, a broad woman with silver-streaked hair and careful eyes, looked at Wayne, then at Brittany, and waited. "Marin," Wayne said, "you know my beta commander. My council you'll meet at the table." A brief pause, not hesitation, but the particular weight of a man choosing his words with full awareness of what they mean. "This is Brittany, my Luna." Marin's careful eyes moved to Brittany and warmed with something genuine. Brittany leaned into Wayne's shoulder. Slightly. Naturally. The way you lean into something you have decided to trust completely. Behind them, every torch along the gate wall burned steady and bright in the cold morning air. The stronghold held them both.